The gradation tool works by just basically creating what we were doing early in the course of an interval, and it basically almost creates an infinite number of intervals between two selected colors. So typically that's the foreground and your background color. Now what happens with some of the harmonies is this is a problem. So with an analogous, anything between, if we take a closer look at the hues here, so let's zoom in here, no matter what hue you use here, you're never going to create a hue outside of this range of hue 165 to 240 for our example. You can create any gradation you want. You're never going to create this something outside of this. And this kind of reflects back to the RGB values and how colors are mixing. So if we go down to some of these other examples, a complementary example is kind of the same issue. If we look at this, this is just red, this is just blue and green, but when they mix, if we think about back to the example of complements, they just create gray when they mix together. So in this image, this is transparencies, different levels of opacity, and we can look on this. Let me pull the color window in here for you. So this is, let's get the eyedropper tool up. So hue 180, this is our red, and we can look at these, and basically it's just going to be varying levels of saturation, but no new hues should be involved. Now you're going to see some jumps, but at this point, at 2%, this is basically not saturated. This is going to be basically considered a gray, and when we can see this better, this is why we start to look at other values of RGB when all three are equal. If you remember back, we talked about this earlier. There's just basically 2 unit 126 to 128. This is within that range of acceptable. This is gray, so this isn't actually a hue anymore. It's completely desaturated. So while it's giving us a reading of hue 330, it's gray. There's no real hue here. So that's an important note to understand, and this happens with other hues as well. So if we look at, I have a yellow and blue one to kind of emphasize this point in a minute. So now as we continue, we go back to red, and we see something to expect. But this is kind of understanding the tool and understanding these values, and it's something we've been trying to stress, but now it's starting to come together. So let me go ahead and close out this image to see if so here we have blue and yellow. So when we get to gray, we're going to see this shift of hue, and it's shifting to red in this case. But again, if we go to RGB, we're seeing that they're all equal. We know this is a desaturated color. There actually is no hue present. It's gray. It's basically just a value at this point. There's no hue present. So we don't really have to worry about this being outside of the harmony. So that's a key distinction to make, that when this does change at the point of gray, not to be concerned. But keeping in kind of context of the original, that the blue and yellow, the complements, will just desaturate each other when they're mixed. But if we go to another situation where if we tried to mix split complements, we're going to end up with a situation where various hues are going to occur. So if I put red in the background, and let me put green here in the foreground, and let's go to the gradation tool. So let me pull this in a little bit so I can see a little bit better. So if I do the gradation tool, and I'm just going to do it in the white area here, and you're going to see a whole other range of hues pop out, and that's because those colors, when they mix, are creating hues outside of that harmony. So complements can mix because they only create gray. Analogous colors can mix because they're not creating anything outside of that range. But with the split complementary, we're dealing only with 3 specific hues. So when we mix this kind of green cyan with the red, we're going to get hues between green, cyan, and red. We're going to have that full range start to kind of show up. So if we look at this with the eyedropper, we're seeing this kind of rotate up through, and some of these are very low saturated. So when you go to the yellows, they're very desaturated. We don't perceive it initially as yellow, but we're traveling through yellow right up to red. We're transitioning through that full range of hue, and that happens with a lot of those. So the specific harmonies are where you're going to run into your problems. The triad, a similar problem. You're going to create hues outside the triad. The tetrad, now this is kind of another unique situation. You can mix the complements with the gradation, but you can't mix the neighboring hues, because you're going to end up with the same situation where you're going to have all the hues between the neighboring hues. But when you mix the complements, you're just going to change the saturation between the 2 hues. So hopefully that helps clarify this just a bit.